There is a reason everything feels surreal right now. You think you are losing your grip on reality, but what is actually slipping is your old agreement with a single, linear timeline. You notice it in tiny fractures. You walk into a room, and for a split second, it feels like you've been there in another life. Words you're hearing sound both brand new and eerily remembered. Objects seem slightly out of place, as if someone edited the scene between blinks. Time stretches during trivial moments and collapses during the ones that matter. You keep telling yourself you're tired, overstimulated, too online. But underneath all the rational explanations, something in you whispers, this isn't just in your head. Reality itself is behaving differently. You are not imagining the strangeness. Your nervous system is trying to track a reality that is no longer fully collapsed into one version. The surreal feeling is what it's like when the observer, your consciousness, stops pretending it only has one choice. There was a period in your life when your timeline felt solid, heavy, predictable. You could more or less forecast who you would be next year, where you would be, how your days would unfold. It might not have been fulfilling, but it was stable. Reality felt like a wall. Now it feels like vapor. You are moving through a phase where the quantum field around you is no longer holding just one dominant script. Multiple possibilities are brushing against your awareness at once. You feel this as disorientation, as if your inner camera keeps refocusing. But at the level of physics, your observer effect is loosening the lock on a single outcome. You notice patterns glitching. Old habits don't click the way they used to. People you thought were permanent characters begin to fade out or act like different versions of themselves. Synchronicities cluster, repeating numbers, improbable meetings, phrases that echo across unrelated conversations. It feels like hidden hands are rearranging props behind the scenes. This is not random chaos. This is what it looks like when your consciousness migrates from a fixed probability line to a band of timelines that are simultaneously available. Of course, your mind tries to protect you by calling this surreal, weird, unsettling. It was trained to believe that reality must be consistent, to be safe. But consciousness doesn't evolve inside a locked script. It evolves at the exact edges where the script starts to dissolve. So you find yourself here, in the liminal corridor between who you were and who you have not yet agreed to become. Nothing fully fits. Old desires don't satisfy you. New desires aren't fully formed. You feel like you are walking through a dream that knows it is being watched. This message found you inside that corridor on purpose, because the very fact that everything feels surreal is not a malfunction. It is a diagnostic, a precise indicator that your timeline is no longer fully locked in, that the quantum loom has loosened the threads enough for you to weave something radically different if you dare to stay awake while the fabric rearranges. And now, you're going to see what that actually means. You have been taught to treat surreality as a red flag. You've been conditioned to think, if the world doesn't feel solid, something is wrong with me. But pause and look more closely at what is actually happening. You are walking through ordinary spaces, your room, your street, your workplace, and something in the atmosphere feels off. Colors seem a little too saturated. Voices sound like they are echoing from slightly behind the present moment. You catch yourself staring at your own hands as if they belong to a character you're temporarily inhabiting. The old you would dismiss this as dissociation, as stress, as a nervous system overload. And yes, your nervous system is involved, but not as a malfunction, as a translator. It is trying to translate a reality in which the one fixed storyline no longer exists. Think of your previous timeline as a train track, rigid, predictable, forward in one direction only. You lived by that track for years. Your identity, your beliefs, your repeated emotional loops all served as the metal ties bolting the rails into the ground. Every decision you made reinforced the sense that this is just who I am, and this is just how life is. Now the bolts are loosening. Your subconscious has quietly withdrawn its agreement from that track. The beliefs that kept you on it. I'm not allowed to want more. This is the best I can hope for. Nothing truly changes have begun to crack. You don't even fully know when it happened. You only know that something in you got tired of repeating the same scene under slightly different lighting. When those inner agreements weaken, the external world starts to feel less fixed, like a set that can be struck and rebuilt overnight. This is why certain conversations suddenly feel scripted. You hear yourself giving the usual polite response and feel an eerie distance, as if you're listening to a recording of yourself from years ago. This is why you notice the same conflict playing on loop in different relationships, but now there is a strange detachment, a quiet witness in you that no longer wants to play that role. From a psychological perspective, this is the moment your old identity begins to die. From a quantum perspective, this is the moment your consciousness withdraws its energy from one dominant timeline and starts sampling neighboring realities. Your brain, trained to love certainty, labels this sampling as unreal. But what is actually unreal is the idea that you were ever meant to live inside one unchanging narrative. Notice how your body responds to this phase. Sleep patterns distort, dreams become cinematic and unusually vivid. You wake up feeling like you just returned from another life. Your appetite for certain foods, certain media, certain people drops sharply. The songs you used to drown in feel outdated, like they belong to a version of you that has already passed. This is your system shedding resonance. Anything that was only compatible with the old timeline starts to feel heavy, noisy, or strangely foreign. You are not becoming numb, you are becoming precise. Of course, part of you panics. You wonder if you are checking out of reality. You worry that you can't fully plug back into the life you built. What you don't see yet is that this panic is the last defense of the collapsing identity. It doesn't want to die, and so it frames the shift as danger. But feel what is moving underneath that fear. There is also relief, a quiet exhilaration, a subtle recognition that you have been waiting for exactly this instability because stability had become a cage. The surreal sensation is the byproduct of overlapping frames, like seeing two different subtitles on the same film. The old text, "This is just your life, nothing more," is fading. The new text, "You are not locked in, you are choosing the next strand," is flickering into view. Your conscious mind hasn't caught up yet. It keeps reaching for familiar labels: burnout, midlife crisis, spiritual emergency. Some of those labels may describe the symptoms, but they miss the deeper event. The deeper event is this: you are standing at a point of quantum bifurcation, where multiple potential selves are now close enough to touch, and the universe has stopped pretending that your current version is the only one available. That is why everything feels surreal. Reality is no longer presenting itself as a finished product. It is revealing itself as a work in progress, and you are being invited to become a deliberate architect instead of an unconscious passenger. The question is no longer, what is real? The question is becoming, which reality will you lend your coherence to now? To understand what is happening to you now, you have to step behind the scenes of your own reality. You have been trained to think of your life as a line: birth, childhood, choices, consequences, a straight progression of cause and effect. If you made different choices, you tell yourself, you would be on a different line, but you only ever get one. That story was never accurate. It was just stable enough to keep your mind from fracturing under the weight of infinite options. In the quantum field, your life does not exist as a single line. It exists as a cluster of probability threads, different versions of you, each playing out slightly different decisions, emotional patterns, and outcomes. You don't see these threads with your physical eyes, but you feel them as pulls, as what-ifs, as strange déjà vu about a life you never technically lived. Most people unconsciously lock themselves into one dominant thread. They do this through repetition, repeating the same thoughts, the same emotional states, the same relational dynamics, until coherence forms around a particular identity. That coherence is like a magnetic field around a wire, invisible, but organizing. When you hold the same belief long enough, "I always end up alone, money is hard, no one really sees me, I'm just not that kind of person," your nervous system adapts. Your perception filters information to confirm that belief. Your body memorizes the emotions that match it. Your behavior reenacts it. And reality responds with synchrony. People, events, and opportunities line up to make the script look true. That is a locked timeline. Not because the universe decided it for you, but because your coherence was fully invested in one story about who you are and what is possible. Now, your coherence is slipping, not in a chaotic way, but in an evolutionary way. Think of your consciousness as a lens in a quantum laboratory. Wherever you point the lens, particles collapse from waves into fixed positions. Where you don't look, they remain unresolved, fluid, possible. For years, you pointed that lens at the same pattern, the same frequency of self, the same expectation of outcomes. But something in you, call it soul, higher intelligence, future you, has shifted the lens a few degrees. You no longer fully believe your old conclusions. You question your own narrative. You feel impulses that don't match your usual identity. Sudden desires to move, to create, to leave, to speak, to stop performing. That questioning withdraws energy from the old thread and redistributes it into the field of alternatives. At first, this redistribution feels like losing yourself. You don't know what to want. You don't know what to pursue. The roles that used to define you feel like costumes you forgot to take off after the play ended. But underneath that confusion, something intelligent is happening. Your system is scanning. It is sampling neighboring timelines for resonance. You sense it as strange attractions. A topic you never cared about suddenly pulls you in and lights up your mind. A place you've never been calls to you with unreasonable intensity. A person you just met feels like an ancient ally. Ideas appear in your awareness that don't match your past, but feel like home to your future. These are probability threads making themselves known. They are invitations. From a quantum perspective, surreal is what it feels like when your attention stops collapsing only the old pattern and starts flirting with other available realities. From a psychological perspective, surreal is what it feels like when your core identity begins to update and your brain hasn't labeled the new version yet. This is why you can't fully commit to your old life. It's not because you're lazy, indecisive, or broken. It's because your consciousness knows there are other threads now in range, and it refuses to pretend it doesn't see them. The quantum loom, the deeper intelligence weaving all these threads, will never force you. It presents you with intersections, with glitches, with moments of impossible timing, and waits to see what you recognize. Synchronicities are not random signs from the universe thrown at you for entertainment. They are alignment events. They signal that, in that moment, your inner state matches a different potential timeline more strongly than the one you've been living. If you move, speak, or choose from that state, you step onto a slightly altered path. Over days, that alteration is subtle. Over months, it becomes undeniable. Over years, it looks like an entirely different life. Right now, in this phase of surreality, you are standing with one foot on the old track and one foot hovering over a new one. You feel stretched. You feel divided. You feel like you're not fully anywhere. You are not meant to stay in that split. You are being prepared to make a conscious selection, not by forcing decisions from fear, but by understanding how coherence, attention, and probability actually work in the architecture of your reality. Because once you see the mechanics of an unlocked timeline, you can stop asking, "What is happening to me?" and start asking a far more powerful question. What thread am I willing to become coherent with now? You are in the most fragile phase of the shift, the part where nothing is wrong in the obvious sense, yet nothing feels quite right. On the surface, your life might look intact. You are still going to work, replying to messages, showing up in the roles you're expected to play. You laugh when you're supposed to laugh, say "I'm fine" when asked, move through the choreography of the day. But internally, something has gone silent. The motivations that used to drive you don't move you anymore. The fears that used to control you don't have the same authority. You feel like an actor who suddenly woke up on stage, remembers none of the lines, and no longer cares if the audience approves. This is the disorientation before selection. Psychology calls this a liminal phase, a threshold. Quantum physics would call it a region of high indeterminacy, a space where variables are not yet fixed, where the wave function has not collapsed. You are living both definitions at once. Your old identity structure was a set of answers. This is who I am. This is what I do. These are my limits. It's too late to change. When those answers dissolve, your nervous system searches for replacements. It hates gaps, so it floods you with intensities, anxiety, emptiness, sudden spikes of meaninglessness. You interpret these sensations as proof that you're off track. You are not off track. You are off script. The emptiness you feel is not the absence of life. It is the clearing of psychic real estate. Room is being made for a new pattern of coherence, one that can't fit inside the cramped architecture of who you thought you had to be. This is why your usual distractions don't work like they used to. You scroll and feel nothing. You binge content and absorb none of it. You reach for behaviors that previously dulled the ache, and they suddenly feel hollow, even repulsive. Your system is refusing sedation. Because if you numb yourself now, you fall back asleep in the old timeline. You reattach to the track that your deeper self is trying to leave. And so the quantum loom will allow discomfort to intensify until the pain of staying the same exceeds the fear of becoming different. There are moments when you feel like crying for no specific reason. A piece of music, a fleeting smell, a memory from childhood, and your chest tightens with a grief you can't name. That grief is not just about your past. It is about your unlived futures. You are mourning the versions of you that you abandoned to maintain the illusion of safety. You are feeling, in your body, the cost of every moment you told yourself, "This is just how it is," when a quieter voice knew it didn't have to be. In this surreal corridor, the veil between your current self and those unlived selves gets thin. You sense them as ghosts, the artist you never became, the lover you never allowed yourself to be, the truth teller you silenced to keep the peace. They all hover just at the edge of your awareness, not to accuse you, but to ask a question. Will you lock us out again, or will you step toward one of us now? From the outside, nothing in your life may explain why you feel so heavy one moment and so strangely free the next. But inside, a sorting is underway. Every thought that says, "I have no choice," grows louder than shatters. Every story that begins with, "I always," feels brittle, outdated, implausible. Language that once justified your limits now tastes like a lie in your mouth. You try to cling to familiar complaints because they once gave you a sense of continuity, but even your suffering no longer fits. That is a sign. When even your pain stops feeling like home, you have reached the threshold of selection. The surreal quality of your days, the brightness of small details, the slow motion sensation in certain conversations, the eerie feeling that you're hearing a line for the last time is not random. It marks the scenes where the universe is quietly asking, "Do you truly want to keep rerunning this? Are you willing to invest your coherence in this pattern again? Will you choose this version of you one more time?" You may not hear those questions in words, but you feel them in your body as micro-choices. Do you stay in the conversation that drains you, or let it end? Do you override your intuition again, or follow the strange impulse for once? Do you repeat the same apology for existing, or do you allow a different sentence to form? Every one of those micro-choices is a vote, not just for behavior, but for timeline. You are not being punished. You are being calibrated. The surreal fog hanging over your days is the atmosphere of a reality waiting for you to answer one simple, terrifying, liberating question. Who are you when you are no longer performing the version they trained you to be? There comes a point where the universe stops rearranging props and waits for you to move. You are standing in that point now. Up until this phase, much of what has happened has been initiated from the deeper strata of your being. The cracks in your routine, the loss of interest in old distractions, the sudden surges of grief and restlessness, those were internal tectonic plates shifting on their own. You didn't plan them. You didn't choose them. They happened to you. But a timeline doesn't fully unlock just because something happens to you. It unlocks when something happens through you. Choice. Not the superficial kind of choice, vanilla or chocolate, this show or that show, this weekend plan or that one. Those decisions exist inside the same probability band. They don't alter the architecture of your life. The kind of choice you are being asked to make now is structural. It is the decision to stop lying about what you know, what you want, and what you can no longer tolerate. From a psychological perspective, this is called individuation, the moment you step out of borrowed identities and begin to live from an inner authority. From a quantum perspective, this is the moment your consciousness selects a new attractor state, a different basin in the landscape of probabilities. Imagine your life as a valley in a field of hills and basins. For years, your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors formed a groove, a valley in that field. Energy flows where the groove is deepest, so you kept rolling back into the same moods, the same results, the same dynamics, even when you swore you would change. Now, through the discomfort of surreality, the groove has become shallow. You no longer sink as easily into the old valley. You roll sideways, hit new edges, feel unfamiliar inclines. Your system is unstable. This instability is not a flaw, it is an opportunity. Because when the old valley loses depth, you have a rare window to carve a new one. How? Through coherent choice. Coherent choice is not frantic. It is not made from panic, guilt, or the fear of missing out. It is made from alignment between three layers: what you know in your mind, what you feel in your body, and what you sense in the quiet of your being when the noise stops. Most of your old decisions were made to keep one of those layers quiet. You said yes when your body screamed no to avoid conflict. You stayed when your deeper self already knew you were done to avoid loneliness. You tolerated disrespect, misalignment, stagnation because the cost of honesty seemed too high. Every time you did that, you deepened the old valley. You told the quantum field, "This version of me is the one I'm choosing again." Now you are being asked to reverse that process. Coherent choice looks like this. You notice the surreal feeling as a signal, not a threat. You pause instead of automatically performing your usual response. You listen not to the loudest voice, usually fear, but to the most stable one. That stability may feel strangely calm, even if the choice it suggests terrifies your mind. It may say, leave. It may say, speak. It may say, stop performing care for people who never meet you halfway. It may say, create the thing you keep postponing until you feel ready. This voice does not argue. It does not shout. It simply is. From the outside, nothing dramatic needs to happen. You don't have to burn your life down overnight. Quantum shifts rarely begin with grand gestures. They begin with small, precise acts of coherence, repeated enough times to carve a new groove in the field. One honest conversation you were always afraid to have. One boundary you maintain even when it makes you shake. 1 hour each day where you move toward what lights you up instead of what numbs you. One refusal to echo a narrative about yourself that you have outgrown. Each of these acts is an encoded message to the quantum loom. I am no longer investing my coherence in the old thread. I am willing to be rewoven. And the loom responds, not instantly, not always visibly at first, but structurally. People start to self-select out of your life without dramatic fights. Opportunities that match your new state emerge with uncanny timing. Your body, long tense from contorting itself into shapes that didn't fit, begins to soften in unexpected places. You might call this alignment. Physics would call it a phase transition, the moment a system reorders itself around a new pattern when a critical threshold is reached. You are approaching that threshold. The surreal haze will not last forever. It exists to interrupt your automatic behaviors long enough for conscious choice to slip in. If you rush to patch the haze with old certainties, you lose the opening. If you stay inside it just long enough to choose from coherence, you step onto a different contour of reality. And that is when the universe stops mirroring who you were and begins reflecting who you are finally daring to become. Choice without capacity becomes self-torture. So the loom does not just ask you to choose, it asks you to build the body that can hold what you're choosing. You say you want a different life. You say you want a higher timeline, a reality that matches your deeper intelligence. But notice what happens in your body when pieces of that reality begin to approach. A healthy connection appears, and your chest tightens. A genuine opportunity comes, and your breath goes shallow. A moment of visibility opens, and your instinct is to shrink, to distract, to sabotage. This is not because you're weak. It is because your nervous system is calibrated to the old reality. For years, your body has been trained to associate familiarity with safety. Even when the familiar hurt you, Even when it drained you, it was predictable. Your muscles, your fascia, your hormones, your reflexes all learn to organize themselves around that predictability. The new timeline you are sensing is not familiar. It is honest, where your past was performative. It is open, where your past was guarded. It is spacious, where your past was cramped. To your mind, this feels inspiring. To your body, at first, it feels like threat. So the surreal sensation intensifies whenever you lean toward change. You feel ungrounded, floaty, too bright inside. You worry that if you commit to this new direction, you will fall apart, lose everything, become unrecognizable. From a quantum perspective, this is the turbulence of transition, the energy cost of moving from one attractor to another. From a physiological perspective, this is your survival system firing alarms because you are stepping outside the known map. If you ignore your nervous system and try to bulldoze yourself into a new life, you will snap back like a rubber band. You will call it self-sabotage, but it is actually self-protection. Your body will drag you back to what feels survivable. This is why capacity work is not optional. You are not just manifesting, you are repatterning an entire human instrument to play a different reality. Capacity begins with presence. Not mystical, abstract presence, but the practical ability to stay with yourself in sensation, to feel the tightness in your throat when you speak a boundary and not abandon your words, to feel the rush of heat when you tell the truth and not immediately soften it with a joke, to feel the urge to run when someone genuinely sees you and instead take one more breath and remain. Every time you stay, you are training your nervous system to tolerate more truth, more visibility, more coherence. This is not glamorous work. It is the quiet kind. You sit on the edge of your bed, not scrolling, not numbing, and you let the adrenaline discharge through your shaking hands. You place one palm on your chest, one on your lower belly, and breathe until your body stops bracing for impact that never comes. You notice the urge to send the text that would pull you back into the old loop, and you let the urge crest and pass without obeying it. These are micro recalibrations. They look insignificant. They are not. Each time you remain present with a new level of aliveness without escaping, you expand your window of tolerance. You tell your system, this much truth is safe, this much joy is safe, this much spaciousness is survivable. Your baseline shifts. From the outside, it still looks like you are just living your life. But inside, your capacity to host a different timeline is increasing. There is a reason many people glimpse higher possibilities, but cannot sustain them. They taste connection and then create conflict. They experience abundance and then overspend or freeze. They feel creative fire and then drown it in distractions. It is not because they are cursed. It is because their nervous systems were never taught what to do with peace, love, or power that isn't connected to crisis. You are being taught now. Every surreal moment where reality feels too bright, too open, too spacious is a training ground. Instead of asking, how do I get back to normal? Ask, how can I make this level of intensity my new normal? That question changes your posture. You start to elongate your breath instead of cutting it short. You drop your shoulders instead of armoring. You let your gaze soften instead of scanning for danger that belongs to a past scene. And the field responds. Because a timeline is not just a series of events, it is a bandwidth of sensation your body agrees to live in. As you increase your capacity to feel without fleeing, you become eligible for realities that would have previously overwhelmed you. This is how you begin to truly step out of a locked-in life. Not by violently rejecting what was, nor by passively waiting for rescue, but by steadily becoming a human who can stand inside more truth than before, without shattering. The quantum loom is not just weaving events around you, it is weaving you. Muscle by muscle, breath by breath, choice by shaking choice, you are being rewired to hold the frequency of the timeline you keep saying you want. And as your capacity expands, something subtle but decisive starts to happen. The surreal stops feeling like distortion and starts feeling like the early atmosphere of a world that is finally catching up to who you really are. There is a moment in every shift when the change stops being internal only The field begins to answer you back. Up until now, much of this has been invisible. Belief structures dissolving, emotional patterns breaking, your nervous system being retrained to hold more truth and less pretense. You felt it as fatigue, as surges of clarity, as waves of grief and strange calm. But the outer world still looked stubbornly similar. Then, quietly, the mirrors start to tilt. Someone you always had to chase stops reaching out, and instead of panicking, you feel relief. The opportunity you were half pretending to want falls through, and beneath the disappointment, you sense an unexpected lightness. A door you kept banging on with no response suddenly becomes irrelevant because a hallway you never saw before has appeared. This is not random luck or cruel disruption. This is the physical layer, updating to match the coherence you've been building inside. Quantum physics tells you that systems tend toward states of lowest energy configurations that require the least internal conflict to maintain. For years, your life reflected the lowest energy version of your beliefs. It arranged itself to match your self-concept, even if that concept was distorted and self-limiting, because inner and outer misalignment is energetically expensive. Now, you have changed the internal equation. You are no longer willing to carry certain contradictions. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You withdraw from conversations that feed on your self-doubt. You no longer perform smallness as an entry fee for belonging. That reduction of inner conflict forces a reconfiguration outside. From the vantage point of the loom, your reality is a lattice of relationships, places, patterns, habits, and objects that all resonate with a certain frequency of you. When the frequency shifts, some pieces can rise with you, and some cannot. They don't disappear because you're cursed or because you're unworthy. They fall away because they are no longer energetically compatible with what you're becoming. You notice it first in subtleties. A room in your home that always felt heavy now feels unbearable until you rearrange it, clear it, or stop spending time there. Certain digital spaces, feeds, group chats, channels suddenly feel like noise. You might even begin unfollowing in silence, not from judgment, but from a clean sense of, this is not where my reality is forming anymore. People feel it too, whether they can name it or not. Some will suddenly be drawn closer, as if the version of you they always sensed is finally crossing the threshold into visibility. Conversations deepen without trying. They mirror back language and possibilities you've only recently allowed yourself to consider. Others will experience your shift as an interference pattern. Your new coherence will clang against their attachment to the role you used to play. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, difficult, selfish. They will unconsciously attempt to pull you back into the previous script because it made their world more predictable. You are not obliged to ease their discomfort by shrinking. This is one of the most dangerous temptations in an unlocked timeline, taking responsibility for everyone else's equilibrium at the cost of your own evolution. If you do, you voluntarily re-enter the old valley. You send the loom a clear instruction. I choose their familiarity over my alignment. The field will comply. But if you stay coherent, not hardened, not cruel, just unwilling to falsify your truth, a different feedback loop begins. Synchronicities increase, but they change flavor. They stop being vague signs you chase to reassure yourself and start becoming functional confirmations. You think about pursuing a new direction, and within days, a person, a book, or a chance sentence appears with surgical relevance. You speak a hidden desire out loud for the first time, and within hours, a door cracks open that would have remained invisible if you'd stayed silent. This is constructive interference. Your inner frequency and the external patterns begin reinforcing each other instead of canceling out. You will also notice something else. Your tolerance for misalignment plummets. What you once endured for years now feels impossible to sustain for weeks. The slightest self-betrayal produces a disproportionate ache. This is not because you are becoming fragile, it is because you are becoming precise. In a locked timeline, you could anesthetize yourself enough to survive dissonance. In an unlocking one, the cost of dissonance spikes. You feel the friction immediately, and your system urges correction. The surreal feeling shifts tone here. It becomes less like a fog and more like a hyperclarity that borders on uncomfortably bright. You see through social performances. You hear the subtext in people's words. You recognize patterns in your own behavior in real time, not years after the fact. At first, this level of insight can feel brutal. You can no longer unsee where you have been complicit in your own stagnation. You can no longer pretend you didn't know better. But this is the price of authorship. When reality begins to answer back, it is not just rewarding you. It is training you to wield your coherence as a creative force, to recognize that every thought you indulge, every story you repeat, every boundary you maintain or abandon, is a stitch in the fabric of the world you walk through. You asked, perhaps with a quiet desperation, for proof that your timeline was no longer fully locked in. This is the proof, not fireworks, not instant perfection, but a growing correspondence between who you are inside and what echoes back from the outer field, precise, sometimes ruthless, always honest. And as that correspondence stabilizes, you are approaching something even more profound. The moment when you no longer identify as someone inside a timeline, but as the intelligence that the timeline itself is orbiting around. You have spent most of your life believing you were moving through a timeline, as if reality were a conveyor belt and you were being carried along, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but never in control of the machine itself. That belief is dissolving. In this phase, the surreal intensifies in a specific way. You begin to sense that reality is turning around you, not the other way around. Moments that once felt random begin to arrange themselves into patterns with eerie precision. A thought passes through your mind, and within hours, you see its echo in a headline, a conversation, a stranger's sentence. You shift your inner posture from resignation to quiet resolve, and people respond differently to you without knowing why. It feels like subtle witchcraft. It is not. It is the natural behavior of a field reorganizing around a new axis. That axis is your consciousness, stabilized. In your locked timeline, your identity was scattered across other people's expectations, old stories, future fears. Your attention flickered constantly between past regrets and imagined catastrophes. The field had nothing solid to orbit, so it defaulted to inertia, repeating what had already been established. Now, through everything you've endured in this surreal corridor, your attention has been pulled inward and downward into a clearer locus of self. Not the story of you, not the performance of you, but the witness of all of it. You have tasted this witness in fleeting moments. The second, before you react, when you see the entire reaction forming and realize you could choose differently. The stillness at the center of your chest when chaos swirls around you and yet something remains untouched. The sensation, late at night, that you are watching your own life, the way an astronomer watches the sky, noticing constellations where others see only scattered points. This is you as axis. From that axis, choice becomes less about forcing outcomes and more about adjusting orientation. You realize that small shifts in what you hold as fundamentally true about yourself radiate outward in concentric waves, changing what you notice, what you tolerate, what you move toward. You begin to experiment. Instead of affirming, "Nothing ever works out for me," you hold, "Reality is constantly adjusting to my increasing coherence." You don't chant it as a spell. You test it as a hypothesis. You watch, with clinical curiosity, how conversations change when you walk into them, assuming you are allowed to be fully present. You observe what happens to your body when you decide, in advance, that you will not abandon yourself in this interaction. The field responds, sometimes in small ways, sometimes dramatically. You start to notice that certain situations which always spiraled into conflict now dissipate quickly when you remain anchored. People who used to trigger you lose their power when you no longer outsource your self-definition to them. Opportunities that once required you to contort yourself now arrive shaped to your genuine contours. This is not fantasy. It is system dynamics. Everything in your reality, from your finances to your relationships to your health, is part of a complex system influenced by feedback loops. Previously, your feedback loops were driven by unconscious beliefs of unworthiness, scarcity, or inevitability. You didn't notice the loops because you lived inside them. Now, you are beginning to see the loop itself. You watch how a single thought, "This will probably fail," tightens your chest, flattens your tone of voice, dulls your eyes, and subtly communicates defeat to the people around you. They respond from that signal, confirming your expectation, feeding the loop. You also begin to see how a different baseline assumption, "This will shape me, and that is enough," keeps your chest open, your tone alive, your eyes alert. You radiate resilience instead of preemptive collapse. People feel that. They respond with more trust, more collaboration, more openness. The loop shifts. This is you, learning to turn the dials on the quantum loom from the inside. And yet, there is a temptation here, to use this emergent power to simply decorate the old identity, to manifest shinier versions of the same cramped self-concept, to chase status, attention, or control as proof that you are using your consciousness correctly. If you do that, the surreal feeling will return with a hollow undertone, because you will know, at a level deeper than mind, that you are using infinite mechanics for finite games. The loom is inviting you into something larger, to become a stabilizing node for more than just your personal comfort. As your axis strengthens, your influence extends. Your presence in a room alters the default timeline of that room. Where others spiral into reactivity, you hold coherence, and the conversation takes a different path. Where hopelessness would normally close options, you keep your perception open long enough for an unexpected solution to appear. You are no longer just escaping a locked reality. You are becoming a point of divergence for realities around you. This is why your training has been so intense. This is why so much of your old life had to destabilize. You were not being punished. You were being stripped of everything that could not hold this level of responsibility. The surreal is beginning to feel less like disorientation and more like magnitude, the strange, solemn awareness that you are standing at the center of an immense, responsive field. And whether you fully believe it yet or not, one truth is already operational. You are no longer merely inside a timeline. Your timeline is inside you. There comes a night, or a morning, or an unremarkable afternoon when you notice something quiet but undeniable. You are not trying to go back anymore. For a long time, even as you evolved, a part of you was still glancing over your shoulder, wondering if you could reverse it, fit back into the old skin, re-enter the simpler storyline where you knew your role, even if it cost you. That impulse is fading. You hear an old song that used to trigger a familiar ache, and it lands differently. You walk into a space that once defined you and feel like a visitor, not a resident. The people whose opinions once governed your choices begin to blur at the edges, as if their power over you was always made of smoke. This is the onset of irreversibility. In complex systems, there are points where a change stops being incremental and becomes structural. The system can no longer return to its previous configuration without breaking. You have reached such a point. Your consciousness has crossed an energetic threshold. You know too much about your own agency now. You have seen the architecture behind the set. You have watched your internal shifts ricochet outward into the field. You may still doubt the magnitude of your influence, but you cannot unknow that it exists. The surreal feeling is changing texture again. It is less about, "Is this real?" and more about, "How was I ever convinced that was the only real?" You look back at past versions of yourself, the one who tolerated what you now recognize as violence to your own spirit, the one who begged for crumbs of validation from people who could never see you, and you feel a strange mix of tenderness and awe. Because somehow, from inside that constriction, you still found your way here. This is the part of the shift where timelines begin to diverge more visibly. In subtle ways, you start to live in a different world than people standing right next to you. They may still believe that everything is fixed, that nothing truly changes, that life is something that happens to them while they brace for impact. You, meanwhile, are walking through the same streets with the awareness that each interaction, each choice, each thought is part of an ongoing negotiation with the fabric of reality. You hear them speak about their lives as if they are reading from a script engraved in stone, and somewhere deep inside, you feel the soft but unshakable recognition. I am not inside that script anymore. This can be lonely at first. You might feel a temporary distance from the familiar, as if you are watching reality through a sheet of glass. You may find yourself editing less, saying less, participating less in rituals of complaint or cynicism that used to bond you to others. Do not mistake this for regression. It is recalibration. You are learning to breathe at a different depth. You are learning to be with silence, without rushing to fill it with noise that no longer matches you. You are learning that not everyone can come with you, not because you are superior, but because each soul travels at its own cadence. In the Loom's terms, you are stabilizing on a new strand. The proof is not in grand manifestations or dramatic plot twists, though those may come. The proof is in your micro-refusals to betray yourself, even when no one is watching. It is in the thought you no longer indulge at 3 a.m., the apology you don't offer for existing, the message you don't send to reopen a loop you already closed. You begin to notice that your body anticipates your alignment. Where you once needed days to recover from a self-betrayal, now the feedback is immediate. A single step out of integrity feels like walking against gravity. A single step into integrity, even if it costs you comfort, clicks into place with an audible inner yes. Gnome, firms, bend. This is how you know the new timeline has become more real to your system than the old one. You are not rehearsing anymore. You are inhabiting. The surreal doesn't vanish. It refines. It becomes an atmosphere of luminous strangeness, the way a city feels at dawn when the streets are empty and the light is soft, and you can sense, in your bones, that everything could begin differently today. You are living in a permanent dawn state, not because you will never face darkness again, but because your relationship to darkness has changed. It is no longer the proof that you are trapped. It is the background against which your choices carve luminous routes through the unknown. You may still stumble. You may still forget. You may still have days that feel heavy, lifetimes compressed into a single hour of doubt. But even in those moments, a deeper continuity holds. You no longer belong to a reality where you are only a victim of circumstance. You no longer belong to a storyline where your desires are embarrassing, your intuition is dismissed, your perception is gaslit. You belong to the version of reality where your awareness matters, where your coherence counts, where the way you look at the world configures the world that looks back. You asked what it means when everything feels surreal, when your timeline is no longer fully locked in. It means exactly this. You are crossing the irreversible threshold from being an unconscious passenger to becoming an awake participant in the weaving. And on the other side of that threshold, a final realization waits for you not as an idea, but as a lived truth. You were never meant to simply survive a single fixed reality. You were designed to remember that you are, and always have been, part of the intelligence that shapes realities themselves. At some point, the question stops being, is this real? It becomes, what will I do with the fact that reality answers me back? You stand here now, not at the end of a story, but at the conscious edge of one. The surreal has walked you through every layer of your own architecture, from the cracks in your identity, to the mechanics of probability, to the slow training of your nervous system, to the moment your world began to rearrange around your coherence. Now the loom does something simple and absolute. It hands you the thread. No more waiting for a sign strong enough to override your doubt. No more hoping someone else will confirm the magnitude you feel moving under your skin. No more bargaining with timelines that already proved they can't hold who you're becoming. You know too much now. You know that when everything feels slightly unreal, it is not a defect in your perception, it is a signal that the lock has turned. You know that the emptiness you used to fear is actually unallocated possibility. You know that your smallest act of integrity, your quietest refusal to self-betray, ripples out through the quantum field with more force than any desperate attempt to control. So this is where the transmission becomes a covenant. Not between you and an outside power, but between you and the intelligence moving through your own awareness. You are not asked to be perfect. You are asked to be precise. Precise in the stories you allow to repeat in your mind. Precise in the relationships you continue to feed with your attention. Precise in the way you speak about your future, even in casual conversations that seem to not matter. Because you understand now, there is no such thing as not mattering. Every thought is a micro-measurement in the observer effect. Every emotional pattern is a vote for one version of reality over another. Every embodied choice is a stitch in the loom. So take a breath here, now. Feel your feet on the ground, as if the entire planet is a stabilizing field beneath you. Feel your spine as the axis your timelines rotate around. Feel your chest as the chamber where new agreements are written. And inside that stillness, let a simple declaration form, not as affirmation theater, but as an internal law. I will not pretend to be smaller than the reality that keeps responding to me. Say it once, in your mind. Say it again, under your breath. Let your nervous system register it as a new baseline command. You will still have days when the world blurs at the edges. You will still feel the old gravity tugging at your ankles sometimes. You will still be offered roles that belong to past versions of you. But now you will recognize those moments for what they are. Checkpoints, not verdicts. Proof that your timeline is no longer fully locked in. Proof that the loom is still listening. Proof that you are being trusted with the quiet, immense power of an awake observer. From here on, every time everything feels surreal, you will remember this. It is not reality breaking. It is reality asking, with absolute patience and terrifying love, which world do you choose to make real with the way you see, feel, and move now? And you no longer a passenger, but a weaver will answer.